So now that we've proven that happiness is the highest good, good in itself, we still have one much more fundamental task, and that is proving that it's objective and then showing what its objective content is. So our next question is, what is happiness? Aristotle recognizes saying happiness is the highest good in some sense is so true that it lacks any content whatsoever. For example, if I said the good is good, I would be saying something that's true but uninformative. So, what is happiness? Aristotle will first consider the popular answers to this question in his culture, and you're going to discover that these answers, these popular answers, are very similar to the kinds of answers we give in our culture about what constitutes true happiness. But Aristotle is going to consider each of these and show why they really can't be what we're looking for when we're looking for happiness in life. So I'm going to be reading in his Ethics, the Nicomachean Ethics, on page 8. So if you have the book with you, open up there. If not, then just listening along. But let us just resume from the point at which we digressed. To judge by their lives, the masses and the most common seem not unreasonably to believe that the good or happiness is pleasure. Now you notice, even though he says the great mass of people believe this, he doesn't think it's unreasonable to say this. Well, why? Well, because let's face it, pleasure is something like happiness that we seek for itself. No one, again, seeks pleasure for something other than the pleasure that it gives them. It makes them feel good. That's why they want it. So pleasure isn't a thing that's good for something else. It's good in itself, just like happiness. But what makes it something that's not happiness? This Aristotle is going to explain to us in the next few sentences. Accordingly, they ask for nothing better than the life of enjoyment. Broadly speaking, there are three main types of life. One just mentioned, the political, and thirdly, the contemplative. So he says something which we would almost all agree with. What do we want in life? We want to have fun. We want to enjoy life. We go to work. Why? Well, because this will give us money, which we can then use to enjoy ourselves. So this, again, seems to be the common answer, especially in American and European culture. We want to live lives that have a maximal amount of enjoyment and very little suffering. We want lives, to put it bluntly, of pleasure. So, what's wrong with this? He states it in one sentence. The utter servility of the masses comes out in their preference for a bovine existence. Now this is very interesting. He states first that this kind of pursuit has two characteristics to it. First, it is a pursuit that is full of servility. Servility is just a really big word for being a slave. And he says this kind of existence is a bovine existence. And bovine is just another word to describe a cow or an animal. So he's saying those who pursue pleasure as their ultimate good are really no different than either slaves or animals. Well, why would that be the case? Why is making pleasure my ultimate goal in life going to enslave me? Well, think about the kind of life that we would dream of, where every whim, every pleasure that we seek after is given to us. What would happen to us? Well, first of all, that pleasure itself would be something that the minute it calls, we answer. Because pleasure is always felt as something that is not us. We enjoy it, we want it, we hope to possess it, but pleasure isn't us. The more I give into pleasure, the more I become, therefore, a slave to that pleasure. I can't resist it. We become addicted to pleasure. And when you become addicted to something, then you are no longer the master. You are the slave of that pleasure. Maybe, for example, it's good food. You love good food, and maybe when without a lot of money, you can't have that. And so, thus, you learn to control yourself. But then you become rich, and you can have all the food you want, any kind of food you want. What do you discover? Well, you discover two things. You discover that the food you like, you no longer like as much because you have it all the time. You also discover that now your pleasures are much harder to fulfill, and so you need much more high quality food to pursue that pleasure. And so, thus, what happens is every time you are hungry, since now you are not trained to control yourself, the hunger becomes the thing that tells you what to do. And who else is like this? Well, cows, animals. These are the ones that you might call them literally walking stomachs. When a cow is hungry, a cow doesn't contemplate, should I eat? Will I gain weight? Will this make me something less than myself? No, when a cow is hungry, a cow eats. When a dog is hungry, a dog looks for food. And therefore, we lower ourselves to the level of slaves and animals when we seek after pleasure as our ultimate good. Pleasure becomes the master, we become the servant. And therefore, we're not fulfilled, are we? We can't really be happy, Aristotle says, if we're not in control of our happiness. If the ones that are in control are our pleasures, and there are many of them, then it will turn out that we will be less happy the more pleasure we receive, and the more we're able to just give ourselves up to a dissipate life of pleasure. So that can't be it. Well, then what about honor or fame? In the United States, this is really something that we seek after, isn't it? That is why when you see auditions for American Idol or for The Voice, you see every time these auditions go to a particular city, half the city lines up just for their moment of fame. This seems to be something, again, that we seek for itself. Once we have honor and fame, then it seems that we have a good life, don't we? We are happy. But Aristotle realizes something about honor and fame, even though it is not as low a thing as just simple pleasure, it is something that is not dependent on us, is it? It is as if we want to belong and we want everyone to love us. And so, what do? We do something that's great, that everyone loves, and now we're insecure. Because what if we can't keep it up? Do you see what happens? Our happiness becomes dependent, just like pleasure, but now on other people, on circumstances. And thus, it isn't something that we are, again, in control of. But what makes this also not a good candidate for the ultimate good is we often want this honor and this fame and this greatness because we want to prove something, don't we? We want to prove that we are good. And we think that the fame will, that we can become famous and that people will admire us for these qualities that we have, will prove our goodness. But if honor and fame is what we seek in order to prove that we have obtained the good, then it itself cannot be the good, for we're using it to obtain that good. So this can't be it either. It's dependent on others, and it is used to prove goodness. Well, the third alternative, what seems to make us more independent than wealth and riches, right? When I have wealth and riches, I can live a more independent existence. I don't have to worry about going to work every day. I am in control. I decide what pleasures to pursue, what pleasures not to pursue. I don't need honor and fame because I can get what I want through my wealth. This seems to be probably the one that's most in line with what we as Americans think of as the American dream, right? Health, wealth, and prosperity. And of course, wealth is the foundation of that prosperity, even health. We get better doctors, better care. All of these things come along with wealth. But Aristotle thinks this should be the easiest to see as not the final good, as not happiness. Why? Again, wealth is only as good as what you can buy with it. It is a means to something else, isn't it? When I was a kid, I used to love to watch Scooby-Doo. And there was this one episode where Scooby was one of the candidates for inheriting the wealth of an old Confederate general. And they had to go to the mansion where the old general had died and lived there for a whole night. And if they were able to brave the haunting of the mansion and figure it out, then they would receive millions and millions of dollars and become wealthy. Well, they do that. And they win the wealth of the Confederate general. They inherit that money. When the money is given to them, they discover something very interesting. They discover that the money is Confederate money. It isn't U.S. money. So yes, they have a lot of money, but the money can't be used to buy anything. Money, if you cannot use it to buy anything, is worthless. But what did we say about the highest good? It has to be good in itself. It's not good for something else. It doesn't borrow its value, but money is inherently something that borrows its value from what it can buy. And since we use it to buy what we think is good, then wealth can't be the ultimate good. Those who chase after wealth then are chasing not only in the wrong direction, they're chasing in the wrong country, in the wrong continent. They think that something that is inherently not good, but only good for something else, is the ultimate good. And so they're stupid. They're not wise, Aristotle would say. So we see that the popular definitions of happiness don't work. Pleasure can't be happiness because pleasure is something that enslaves you the more you pursue it. And therefore, the more you pursue pleasure, the less you get it. Honor and fame can't be it because honor and fame are ultimately insecure. And therefore, if we rely on that for our ultimate good, then we will never truly be secure in our happiness. And we want it not for itself, but for what it will make us feel, for our own self-esteem. And therefore, it cannot be the ultimate good. And wealth by its very nature can't be the ultimate good. So then what is happiness? What is this eudaimonia that we seek?